Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to another Word of Gord. And today we're pursuing our Average Folks in the Afterlife series. It's number 9, I think. I just checked, so I better be right. And we're going to continue on exactly where we left off at the end of number 8. Reading from More Adventures in Eternity and those souls getting ready to be reborn, and Astral Gordon interviewing them. More or less, anyway. Now, Phil gave me directions to the cabin he mentioned. It was set back from the river a ways and was so shrouded in bushes I would have missed it had I not been made aware of its existence. The buildings themselves were charmingly rustic, and I guessed comfortable in only the most basic of ways. A short, compact gentleman with a demeanour just this side of grave answered my knock. When I explained my purpose, he invited me in. Seating us by a window, he unfolded his purpose. In his last 2 lives, he'd been an Istanbul merchant who dabbled in magical practices and an Egyptian engineer who'd discovered Sufism in middle age, making the kind of commitment to its regimen of self-development which souls at a certain stage must experience. Control of desires and marshalling of mental energies were the 2 things he'd learned from those lives. Now he wanted to go backwards about 800 years to the Mediterranean area, and likely Spain in particular, to experience the culture and surroundings which shaped the beginnings of the esoteric teachings now known as the Kabbalah. I let him continue under his assumption that I knew little or nothing about the magnitude of his aim and was little more than a sensation-seeking journalist. He had some blinders on, and I didn't feel it was up to me to remove them. Perhaps their efficacy was intrinsic to the journey. Tea? His father, he continued, was likely to be a North African merchant, a devout Muslim whose business regularly took him to Spain and interaction with both Jews and Christians, men of sciences and the arts as well as business. He wanted the kind of wide-ranging experiences that such a cultural mélange would bring. Of course, in that epoch, risks of illnesses and infections were so high, so the seeds of determination were being built into his character. The willpower would be balanced by compassion, so that his almost natural urge to dominance would be tempered with waves of kindness, which would, in theory anyway, wear away the walls of contempt established in other lives. And yes, he continued, anticipating my question, he was making a brave and perhaps ultimately foolish attempt to bring through some 20th century knowledge to that world. Quantum physics and cosmology, he smiled, gesturing to some books on the table. He'd been advised by more than one guide not to, that it would inevitably lead, if not to madness, then at least mockery by the intellectual establishment of the day. Perhaps only wisps of knowing would remain in the brain beset by the beliefs of the epoch, and perhaps those wisps would be next to useless. But maybe, just maybe, he would meet up with one of the men who would dare to write down the oral wisdom of the centuries, then congealing into the commentaries we know as Kabbalah, and influence him with his subconscious inspirations. I had to admit it was a daring experiment, was it not? Becoming even a tiny part of cultural history seemed like a magnificent adventure to him. I thanked him for his time and wished him well. He walked me to the door, his eyes twinkling. I strolled through the forested bliss, simultaneously intrigued with who I might find next, and yet somehow carefree in that couldn't care less about anyone's agenda kind of way. Don't ask me to explain it, please. It's probably something to do with being OBE at night and not giving a shit you're having so much fun. Anarchy in heaven and all that. I sat down with my back to a tree, always a telltale sign. Within seconds I had merged with its spirit, felt its joy in being, and knew at least some of its ambitions. Then I shot up its spine and out into the astral space that could, if you want, be called sky. From there I spread out over the landscape like a fat cloud being flattened into a very thin pancake. Every square inch of that pancake conscious of the thoughts and desires of the astral beings below it. I say conscious, but maybe I'm exaggerating. Not so much the details of every soul's aspirations, but a general impression of the collective semi-conscious. I say semi, as on the astral everything moves up a notch or two. So the collective unconscious of the physical plane becomes at least semi-conscious here. There's a vibrant, bustling kind of joy, an enthusiasm for adventure, a sense of game plans unfolding and lessons learned, the thrill of at least a glimpse or two of the plan of evolution, a seeing that it applies to spirit as well as form, and a kind of irrepressible giddiness at the interconnectedness of everything and everyone. Of course, that's just at this level, which is largely populated with souls about to return to incarnation. There are many others where conditions vary greatly from here. Having absorbed the vibe like an invisible sponge, I reassemble my intentions and move up a level or two, arriving at what theosophists call the Buddhic or intuitional plane. Here you just seem to know everything, or at least instantly understand each manifestation as it appears. All the painful contradictions of family and society seem very evident here. The seemingly pointless turmoil of existence appears all too obviously simple. That whole experience of, well, of course! Complex three-dimensional geometric structures float by, and I somehow understand the method of their construction as I perceive them. Music multiplying from one tone, the ultimate scheme of self-replication. Fast-forward movies of giant prehistoric mammals morphing into hawks and sparrows, of fish becoming hairy, leaning on rocks and trying to breathe, or various evolutionary strategies doomed to failure, the first being incest, the second being man and beast, the third selective breeding based on rank and gender. Those almost unimaginably tough early days on our planet, when various volunteers decided to decamp in favor of other planetary systems with an easier learning curve. And more and more. All in about the time it would take to unwrap some chewing gum and pop it in your mouth. But I digress. Fun is fun, but I do have a purpose, and that is to inform you of some of the rich variety in the realm of re-embodiment. So let us return to the Valley of Cabins and see who is ready. I reappear in a small meadow in the middle of a forest and approach two women lying in long grass. Hello, ladies, I recall, hoping to minimize the invasion of their privacy. Well, I need not have worried. Abby and Valerie, at least that is what they believe their mother has planned for them, are going to be identical twins. And it's not the first time either. Sure, they've been closely associated many times before. Probably a little too closely for comfort. Mother and daughter, father and son, business partners, deadly rivals. They've done a bit of everything, actually. But almost always together. Last time they lived out their old age as spinster sisters in the mid-1800s in the cottage their dear father had bequeathed to them. Herbalists, gardeners, nature lovers, fulfilled in each other, they had no need for society. In fact, rather disapproved of it. This time their guides have convinced them to look outward instead of inward, and so, to that end, they have picked completely incompatible personality traits that should drive in a very early wedge, pushing them, hopefully, to either side of the continent, where they can face up to various challenges that they mutually their mutual devotion previously let them skip. Yes, they've been in and out of the womb a few times now. Fetus is about 5 months on. Mother very pleased with the ultrasound images. Dad a little panicky about money, already started a small college fund. They'll be born somewhere in the Hudson Valley, but a job opportunity will likely have them brought up near London, England, by the time of their teen years, affording them both a mixed up bringing and easy access to various European locales, where they can work off the remaining heat from any of several karmic links. Budapest, St. Petersburg, Oslo, and a variety of small towns throughout Belgium, Holland, Normandy, Tuscany, and the Greek islands will get a workout this time around. Husbands and children are definitely on the map this time too, although a number of complicating factors have the opportunity to intervene. Abby has a habit of running from the steady routines of family for the thrills of foreign adventure, and with the help of, well, it looks like he's going to be called Eric this time, she'll have the chance to jump ship one more time, and hopefully will have the strength to resist and stay the course. Eric apparently has been shown a possible opportunity to bring his outlaw talents to the fore once again. By the time they're all adults, the successful regeneration of organs from stem cells should be a done deal, science-wise. But resistance from various religious groups will restrict access in certain parts of the globe. He or someone like him will be instrumental in developing a climate-controlled and virtually indestructible set of carrying cases, and their inherited Robin Hood qualities will give them the ingenuity and drive to overcome the obstacles placed by repressive societies. This setup, of course, combined with Eric's customary maverick allure, will prove almost irresistible to the kitchen-clutching Abby, but resist is what she really wants and needs to do. Valerie laughs and says she'll believe it when she sees it. She, of course, will have no problem sticking to her domestic course. Stoking the home fires has rarely been a problem for her, at least in her in her female lives. Mothering and grandmothering are second nature by now, and this time her two boys have promised neither to run off to war or die in some other young man bravado shtick, as they have done several times before. Biologist and gynecologist this time, Mom, they've promised, she tells me, laughing. I ask about parents. Yes, they're both well connected. My dad's been an uncle, brother, and son, and once, in Roman times, I had a torrid affair with him, Abby informs. That's until I got a witch to put a spell on her, Valerie grins. It worked, too, adds Abby. I sickened, got ugly spots on my face, and had to go to another witch to get the curse removed. And by the time I'd got all that done, he'd lost interest. Men! They squeal in unison. Want to hear about our male lives? Asks Valerie. Sure, I say. Comrades, monks, soldiers, business rivals. Don't forget the slaves. That's where we really bonded, pipes Abby. Yeah, but it was so nasty and tough, replies Valerie, that you hate to think about it, right? I know, but it's where we really started to care. When we were competing over the Greek senator, it was mostly pretense. Competitive envy was our bonding agent, and let's face it, his wife always came first. Not to mention the stupid kids. We won't get into that prehistoric stuff. Way too violent for a family audience. I engage Valerie as she says this, wondering what they might have to say about Atlantis and Lemuria. Nothing, as it turns out. Maybe they haven't checked that out. When one does a past life review, one only accesses what one is ready to handle. There is no pressure to take on more than you can handle. Guides understand the need to focus on certain themes and areas without complicating matters unnecessarily. There's always time for the forgotten civilizations, not to mention the other planetary systems from which Earth seemed like a fascinating learning opportunity once upon a time. Abby asks if I'm about to incarnate. I tell her no, I'm just out adventuring while sleeping in Canada, taking notes for a book I'm writing. About people being reborn? Well, that's part of it. I outline the Eternal Life trilogy for them, and some other works that might spin off from its success, stuff dear old Gordon hasn't even begun to think about yet. They seem impressed and joke about reading it when they grow up. Their own higher self experience is still fresh, but it's the one thing they both assume they'll forget while incarnate. Well, that is one of my purposes. I wish souls to make and remember that connection to Source. I want them, in the midst of all their earthly entanglements, to be able to embrace their divine connection. Be still and know that you are God, said Abby. Yes, I smile, that's it. It was hard to end such a pleasant interaction, but I could feel old Gordon stirring in his pre-dawn anxieties, the pull of the physical elemental pressuring the soul into another performance. And perhaps now is as good a time as any to tell you how astral Gordon feels about physical Gordon. I, emphasizing the figure of speech rather than the metaphysical conundrum, usually feel a combination of love, pity, and amusement. This poor blinkered being who carries me through the rocky terrain of an Earth day, with all its surging passions and conflicting thoughts, while I, in my way, remain a calm reservoir of wider perspectives and deeper inspirations, deserves all my sympathy for enduring what can only be a very tough haul, while I take a nightly vacation in the lands of next to no gravity and lots of laughs and light. That life of 3 shadowy dimensions is a psychic prison he endures for my and others' benefit, and my gratefulness, although innate, is perhaps not so often expressed as it should be. So now I dive into the ever-darkening ladder, which ends in his rested body, about to blunder its way through another set of society's demands. But for the purposes of this chapter, let us not dwell on his lack of solid connection to my activities, but swiftly move on to the next thought form deposited by moi for his and your delectation. Next night I speed out of the physical and up to this valley of soul preparation, this time at the other end, just to see what I find, or what finds me. Close to the bank and easily in earshot of some hypnotizing rapids, I find another youngish woman. She smiles at my approach and seems glad of the interruption. Yes, she tells me, she's readying for return. Remorse seems to be her main motive, and self-righteousness her main hurdle. A dedicated rebel last time out, one who was completely convinced of the rightness of her personal crusade, she started out insolent in a very teenagerish way, going against every one of her mother's wishes on principle, then developed into an over-the-top party and adventure girl, using her looks to charm her way into the pocketbooks of various wealthy men. The political and social activism of her parents came to seem as indulgent to her as the carefree jaunts and endless parties of her circle did to them. The hurling of accusations became something of a blood sport. I ask if perhaps she died drunk in a speeding car. Yes, she smiles, of course. How did I guess? My turn to smile. But what a way to go, flying through the air at 100 miles an hour or more, and then finding she could continue flying, that there was no end to it, not if you wanted to keep going. What a blast! Zooming about the Rockies first, over snowy peaks and down into mountain valleys, zipping right up to tiny flowers, breathing in the scent, and then zipping off. Flying down the West Coast highways, one gorgeous view after another. Is this how angels live? She wondered, in the midst of all the fun. No wonder they love being angels, who wouldn't? Drifting slowly through the giant redwoods like a tourist in a train city. Were they more like buildings or people? She couldn't tell. But they had this gravity thing they did that was just amazing. Then over to the desert, that incredibly bright emptiness, which now seemed so much more welcoming than when you were dying of the heat. Heat and cold. She noticed that it didn't seem to matter anymore. Couldn't figure out why, then gave up trying. Then out to the coast, somewhere near Big Sur. She wasn't sure even though she'd been there plenty. Flying over the water, coming closer and closer to the waves, but not quite touching. Exhilarating? You bet. Then into the water. Wow, that was something else. Holding your breath for what seemed like ages, then realizing you didn't have to. Then so busy looking at the fish you forgot to breathe. Some fish seemed curious, others fearful, and others didn't seem to care. And wasn't that just like people anyway? She challenged me to agree. I laughed and said sure. The underwater thing seemed to go on forever, but the colors were so rich and pure and some of the fish so weird looking, she hardly noticed time passing. God knows how long she was down there. Suddenly she thought of her buds Mark and David down in Key West. Hadn't seen them in a while. Holy shit, next thing she knew she was there, in their kitchen, watching David make a salad. Seconds later she found Mark on the back porch grooming Wilbur, their pet schnauzer. Oh, those darlings, she just loved them both to death. She charged back into the kitchen and hugged David. Major squeeze and kiss, but he didn't seem to notice. She stuck her tongue in his ear and wiggled it about. She bent down and bit the right cheek of his ass, just like she'd done at their anniversary party last year. Nothing worked. She bit him again, this time harder. Mark walked in with Wilbur draped over his shoulder, and David laughed and walked to the fridge, pulling out some white wine and bread. She hopped up onto the countertop and watched them share a light supper. God, they were happy together. Why could she never find that with a partner? Her relationships were always so speedy, like everything happened so fast she could barely keep up. Exciting for sure, but making crazy too. Tumbling from one situation to another. But she never crashed as her mother predicted. She always kept on top of things. Like her t-shirt said, good girls go to heaven, but bad girls go everywhere. Yeah, wasn't that the truth? I nodded, grinning, charmed as much as agreeing. I'd never been averse to chatterboxes, so I asked what happened next. Well, she'd gotten over a bit gloomy over the relationship thing and sat out dinner on their garden swing. Then, for about the first time in a century, she thought about Jane, her mother Jane, the lawyer's wife. Yep, her dad was a lawyer and mum was a lawyer's wife. You know, all that do-gooder shit, inner city this and Sandinista that. Pictures of Commandante Marcos in the bathroom. Guilty liberals to the max. Always pissing their money away in causes. They were made for a Woody Allen movie. So next thing she knows, and that means like a nanosecond, she's standing behind Jane as she types up a letter or something on her laptop. Still serious, sensible Jane, pencil stuck in her ear. She hasn't been home in months, maybe more, and the last visit was the usual screaming match. You slut, you fake! You'll die of AIDS. It's better than dying of boredom. Your father's ashamed of you. I don't care. And so on, with doors slamming. That's her mother there. Jane with the graying hair, Jane with the crow's feet, Jane with the goddamn sensible shoes, Jane with the James Taylor and Sting CDs, Jane with the family farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania rented to deserving strangers, Jane the devoted maid to Clayton, the lawyer on a mission from God. She looks and she looks and she looks. That could easily have been her life if she'd stayed. They told her she could do as she pleased when she finished college. Well, college finished her. At least the classes did. Social life was the best, though. Why couldn't they have given her a degree in partying? Like turning a page in Vanity Fair, there was a dorm room with Cindy asleep. Was Cindy still there, chugging degrees? The room was dim, but the door opened and the light from the hall flooded in, and she and Brad giggled their way in. She watched them slither under the covers and begin to make out before it hit her. She was watching herself from 2 years before. And Brad was the guy she was driving with before she was flying through the air. Suddenly she was looking down on a car wreck, deep in a ravine, smashed to bits. Nothing she really wanted to look at. I don't blame you, came a voice from behind. It sure is ugly, and the worst part is nobody knows but you and me. She turned her head, and there beside her, floating in midair, was the dweebiest looking guy you could imagine. Like Kevin Spacey on Downers, lousy Downers. Of course, he turned out to be her guide. Been after her for days, but she wouldn't pay attention. Too busy having fun as usual. He'd snagged Brad right away and left him off at some party palace in heaven. Now he wanted to know where I wanted to go. Like I really cared just then, but maybe he had a point. Grooving on a car wreck was pretty retarded, so why not watch another movie? Dweeby as he was, I figured that he knew his way around. And boy, was I right on that one. Smartest move I ever made. Took me around in style just the way I like it. Little princess on a pumpkin. And I thought life on Earth was weird. I'm telling you, the stuff that goes on in the afterlife has got it beat hands down. Kev, as I called him right away, showed me all the winners, from perved out pedophiles, all maxed out from the endless orgy upstairs, to greenhead suits bogeyed from the thrills of trading, to ski bums in ski bum heaven, and surfers in surf heaven. And man, just endless churches and temples with people praying and praising like mad, and miles of cross-legged monks as silent as I don't know what. And Natch, all the totally trapped suburbanites as righteously bored as ever. And about a million more things, give or take a couple, and then over to where Brad was partying. Couldn't believe that one. He was already moving in on another chick, the usual slutty blonde with no bra he always goes for the minute my back is turned. He's like, "Oh, hi, Jen. Isn't this great? Absolutely the best drinks over there." And he's pointing to some bar in the corner after he gives me this hug like I'm his sister or something. And we just drove across the continent together. Man, I've never had much luck. Jane says I make myself too available, which is pretty funny, as she does just about everything for old Clay but wipe his ass. And I wouldn't be surprised if she did that once in a while. Then this blonde bimbo bounces over, kind of licks my cheek and says, "Chill out, Jen, you're not the only one here that's dead." I give her a look and squeeze my way to the bar, where a cool-looking guy passed me a long blue drink, which I have to admit tasted damn fine. Well, that's a long episode, and I don't think we've got time for any more of that right now. But it does give you a notion of the variety of souls and their experiences and their attitude toward rebirth. Other psychics have pointed out in their books, particularly the lady that was the source and consultant for the Ghost Whisperer. I pointed out that since the demise of religion, organized religion in the modern world, and certainly in the West, maybe not in certain hyper-religious parts of the Middle East and the Far East, but in the West, the materialistic West, we have an entire generation now, not just living, but dead, who have died without all the usual encumbrances of fear of God and anxiety about the afterlife and a whole number of other issues that previous generations were, how shall we say, caged in by. And so we have a lot of thousands and thousands, really, of recently dead youngish people who, once they find out the all the fun stuff that you can do when you don't have a physical body, are too busy having fun to give a toot about anything else. So there's a little bit of a portrayal there. And is it any more of a problem than any other issue from previous generations? Personally, I don't think so. For many hundreds of years, we had people getting stuck in what people like me, shamanic journeyers like myself, consider hollow heavens. Heavens where they are essentially imprisoned by religious dogma, from which they would never escape. They would be reborn in a semi-conscious state, not in a fully conscious state, and continue on without the benefits of nirvana and bliss and merging with the higher self and realizing that you are not a personality, that you are not your thoughts, that you are not your emotions or your anything else, that you are a supremely intelligent and fully understanding cloud of light that essentially has nothing to do with bodies or cultures or planets or incarnations, that you are beyond all of that. Anyway, now we have generations of materialists, cynics, and atheists who have their own issues to deal with. And folks like me adapt. It's from one psychic prison to another. It's a fresh challenge, and we welcome it. So, let me now find the area where I switch off. I seem to have trouble doing that. And happy Easter to you all, and happy whatever it is your religious outlook tells you. So long, my friends. Until next time, be well, be happy, and don't panic. It's we're going to survive all this crap. You know, we'll figure away all this sort of religious turmoil and fighting over resources that seems to be going on all the time. We'll get by. Ciao.